Good evening and welcome to History for Your Sleep. You're safe here, and you can let your mind settle for a moment. Take a slow, comfortable breath and allow the day to loosen its weight around you. If these calm journeys bring you peace, you may subscribe whenever it feels right, quietly, naturally, without any hurry at all. Now, a gentle story begins. Tonight, we step into ancient Angkor, a world of stone temples and quiet waterways, shaded courtyards, long causeways, and soft footsteps moving beneath towering trees. A place where mornings rose with mist over the reservoirs, where evening air cooled the carved stone, and where daily life unfolded in slow, steady rhythms beneath the wide Khmer sky. Let us wander there, slowly, softly, and let Angkor rise around us in the calm of the night. After the final words of the introduction fade, the world does not rush forward. Instead, Angkor appears slowly, as it always did, not with noise or spectacle, but with presence. The first thing you sense is space, not an open plaza, not a grand avenue, but a wide, breathing landscape where stone, water, and earth are arranged with intention. The causeways leading inward feel long and deliberate, bordered by still water and low embankments, reminding you immediately that this city is not meant to be crossed quickly, and that arrival itself requires patience. At first light, movement begins quietly. Figures walk along raised paths, some carrying baskets, others empty-handed, their steps unhurried but purposeful. The air is heavy with moisture from the night, and the ground still holds the memory of water. Angkor does not greet you with walls closing in or streets tightening around you. Instead, it opens outward, revealing that this is a city stretched across the land rather than gathered into a single center. What you are entering is not a compact urban core, but a managed environment where daily life depends on distances measured in effort rather than in minutes. The architecture at the threshold feels authoritative without being aggressive. Stone gates and monumental entrances exist, but they do not define where life happens. They mark control and order, reminding everyone who passes that power is present even when it is not actively displayed. These structures were never just symbolic. They shaped behavior. They slowed movement. They created awareness that entry and exit mattered, that the city was not simply wandered into, but entered with understanding. Beyond these formal points, the true city begins to reveal itself. Ponds appear everywhere, small tanks beside paths, larger reservoirs stretching into the haze. Water is not decoration here. It is function. It is memory. It is risk. People move with an instinctive awareness of it, stepping carefully along edges, adjusting routes depending on the season. In Angkor, water decides how far you walk, how early you start, and how much strength you must carry into the day. There is calm in this early hour, but it is not emptiness. The quiet is filled with preparation. Somewhere nearby, a hearth is being lit, smoke rising gently and clinging low in the damp air. Elsewhere, someone rinses their hands at a pond before beginning work. These are small gestures, repeated every day, and they form the true rhythm of the city. The temples may dominate memory, but they do not dominate mornings. Ordinary life begins first, and it begins everywhere at once. Yet even in this softness, there is a darker undercurrent. Distance is not neutral. Walking long paths under rising heat will cost energy before labor even begins. Carrying water means weight added to the body before the day has properly started. The city's scale, impressive from above, is tiring from within. For many people, daily life in Angkor begins already demanding something from the body, quietly and without ceremony. As the light strengthens, more figures appear, moving in loose patterns rather than crowds. This is not a city of sudden convergence. People rarely gather all at once. Instead, they pass through shared spaces briefly, their lives overlapping and separating again. Privacy here is shaped by distance rather than walls. You are rarely alone, but you are also rarely together in large numbers. This creates a sense of constant awareness, of being part of something larger without ever fully seeing it. Authority remains present in subtle ways. The layout itself communicates expectations. Paths guide movement, water limits wandering. Certain spaces feel open, others feel clearly reserved. Even without visible guards, behavior is shaped by what the city allows and what it quietly discourages. Order is embedded into the land, not enforced loudly, but maintained through familiarity and repetition. The morning does not bring relief from this structure, it confirms it. Each step inward shows that Angkor was designed to be lived in through routine rather than choice. People do not ask where to go, they already know. The city has taught them, day after day, season after season. This predictability brings stability, but it also narrows life into well-worn paths. To deviate would require energy most people cannot spare. By the time the sun clears the horizon fully, it becomes clear that you have not entered a city in the usual sense. You have entered a system that stretches across fields, ponds, canals, and neighborhoods. A system where stone monuments rise above a world of wood, water, and labor that rarely survives in memory. What feels calm now will soon become effort, heat, and repetition, and this realization changes how Angkor must be understood. To know how people truly lived here, you cannot focus only on what stands tall and endures. You must look outward across the land, following the paths people walked every day, the distances they crossed, and the spaces they returned to again and again. Because Angkor was never just a city you entered at dawn. It was a landscape you lived inside, continuously. Once you move beyond the first sense of arrival, Angkor begins to reveal its true nature. It becomes clear that this place does not behave like a city in the way most people imagine one. There is no tight center pulling everything inward, no clear boundary where urban life ends and something else begins. Instead, the city stretches outward, dissolving into fields, ponds, canals, shrines, and workspaces, until it becomes difficult to say where the city stops and daily survival begins. Walking through Angkor means crossing space rather than streets. Paths feel long, not because they are dramatic, but because they are unavoidable. Homes are spread apart. Water features interrupt direct movement. Temples rise at intervals rather than clustering together. This creates a daily experience defined by distance. Every errand costs time. Every task requires walking under an open sky. For ordinary people, the city is not something they move through casually. It is something they endure steadily, step by step. Water shapes this experience more than walls ever could. Ponds appear beside houses, along paths and near fields, each one serving multiple purposes at once. They store water, they regulate flooding, they support cooking and washing, and they quietly dictate where people can and cannot go. In the dry season, these ponds shrink, exposing mud and debris. In the wet season, they expand, creeping closer to homes and paths, turning familiar routes into careful negotiations with the land. This dependence brings both stability and unease. When water behaves as expected, life flows with it. When it does not, everything slows or strains. Carrying water becomes harder. Paths soften underfoot. Insects multiply. The city does not collapse in these moments, but it becomes heavier, more demanding. Comfort was never guaranteed here. It had to be earned daily. often physically. The layout of Angkor encourages a quiet separation between people. Families live near one another, but rarely stacked together. Space exists, but it is open space, not private space. Sounds travel easily across water and flat ground. Smoke from cooking fires drifts freely. You are aware of others even when you cannot see them. This creates a constant sense of shared exposure. Life happens in view, even when no one is watching directly. At the same time, this wide spread reduces crowding. There are no tightly packed alleys pressing bodies together. Instead, there is the fatigue of walking, the repetition of routes, the slow accumulation of effort across a day. Children learn early that distance is part of responsibility. Fetching water, carrying food, moving tools. These are not small chores when every step adds weight to the body under heat. The monumental stone structures rising from this landscape do not contradict this reality. They depend on it. Temples sit where water can be controlled, where people can gather when required, and where labor can be directed efficiently. From a distance, they appear serene. Up close, they feel heavy, not only in material, but in implication. These structures exist because thousands of ordinary lives were organized around maintaining them, feeding those who worked on them, and keeping the surrounding system functioning. There is a subtle darkness in this organization. Because the city is so spread out, help is not always close. Illness means someone must walk farther to fetch water or food. Injury means tasks still wait to be done. The landscape does not pause for weakness. In a city built across such space, endurance becomes a quiet virtue, and vulnerability becomes something people manage privately. Movement through Angkor is guided rather than free. Roads and raised causeways channel travel, especially during the wet season. Deviating from them risks mud, water, or delay. Over time, people learn where they belong and where they are expected to be. This is not enforced loudly. It is enforced through geography. The land itself teaches discipline. As the morning progresses, the city feels more awake, but not more compact. People continue to pass one another without gathering. Work begins in scattered places: fields at the edges, households near ponds, temple compounds further inward. Angkor functions because everyone moves within their assigned spaces, trusting that the system will hold if each part does its work. To an outsider, this may feel peaceful. To someone living within it, the calm hides effort. There is little room for idleness when distance alone consumes so much time. Rest exists, but it is shallow, often delayed until the day's obligations are met. Understanding Angkor requires accepting this truth. Its greatness lies not only in stone, but in the way daily life was stretched across land and water, asking ordinary people to give their bodies to the system quietly, repeatedly, and without spectacle. And as you continue deeper into this landscape city, another reality begins to surface. Because living across such space also means relying on what lies inside it, the fragile shelters people return to each night, built not of stone, but of wood, thatch, and smoke. That is where life truly settles. As life continues to stretch across the land, it eventually narrows again, not into streets or squares, but into the spaces where people return when the work of moving through Angkor is done. After long walks along causeways and paths shaped by water, the city resolves into something far more fragile and far more human. Ordinary houses, built not to impress, but to survive seasons, heat, and repetition. These homes do not announce themselves the way temples do. They sit quietly near ponds, fields, and paths, raised slightly above the ground, resting on wooden posts that lift living space away from damp earth and rising water. From a distance, they blend into the landscape. Their materials are borrowed directly from it: timber, thatch, woven fibers, chosen not for permanence but for practicality. This is why they rarely survive in memory. Wood rots, Thatch disappears. What remains are stones, and with them a distorted idea of where life truly happened. Inside these houses, space is shared and flexible. Rooms do not exist for single purposes. Cooking, resting, storing tools, and caring for children all happen within the same limited area, shifting as the day progresses. Smoke from open hearths lingers. It settles into the air, into clothing, into skin, becoming part of the sensory background of daily life. There is warmth here, but there is also irritation. Eyes sting, lungs work harder, walls darken slowly with soot. Privacy is minimal. Family members live close together, and sounds travel easily through thin walls and open spaces. You hear others breathing at night, moving before dawn, preparing for work without words. This closeness builds familiarity, but it also creates pressure. There is little room to withdraw. Emotions, fatigue, and illness become shared experiences, whether people wish them to be or not. Fire is always present, and with it, quiet risk. A single spark can climb quickly through dry materials, especially in the dry season, when heat presses down on everything. This is not a dramatic fear. It is a constant one. People learn to be careful not because they are warned, but because they have seen what happens when care fails. Entire households can vanish in a night, leaving only ash where a life once repeated itself day after day. Water, again, defines how these homes function. Nearby ponds are used for washing, cooking, and cooling, but they also bring in insects and moisture. During the wet season, water creeps closer, and floors must be watched. During dry months, water sinks away, and carrying it becomes harder. Daily routines shift with these changes, requiring constant adjustment rather than fixed comfort. Children grow up inside this rhythm. They learn early that home is not separate from work. Small tasks begin young: fetching water, watching fires, carrying items short distances that still feel long under heat. There is little distinction between learning and doing. Knowledge is absorbed through repetition rather than instruction. By the time children are older, the shape of their future has already been rehearsed, quietly through daily movement. There is a gentle warmth in these homes, but there is also a subtle darkness. Illness does not arrive politely. When someone becomes sick, care happens here, on mats and low platforms, surrounded by the same smoke and heat as every other day. There are no private rooms for recovery. Healing, when it happens, is slow and uncertain. When it does not, the household absorbs loss and continues, because work does not wait. At night, the house settles, but it does not fully rest. Sounds from outside drift in, insects near water, distant movement, the quiet shifting of other households doing the same small routines. Sleep is light, interrupted by heat, noise, or worry. People rest enough to rise again, not enough to escape fatigue completely. These homes reveal the truth of Angkor more clearly than any temple corridor. They show that daily life here was built on adaptability rather than comfort, on shared endurance rather than individual choice. The city could expand across vast landscapes because its people learned to live simply, close to the ground, and close to one another. And yet, these homes do not exist in isolation. Their routines feed outward, connecting to larger systems of work, obligation, and supply. From these quiet domestic spaces, people move each day toward fields, markets, and workshops, carrying with them the fatigue of shared living and the discipline learned at home. Because once the morning smoke thins and the day demands more than shelter, life in Angkor turns outward again, toward labor, tools, and the steady work that keeps the entire system alive. That is where the next rhythm begins. As the smoke thins inside the houses and the morning light settles fully over the wide landscape, Angkor begins to move with purpose. Not suddenly, not dramatically, inevitably. What starts inside the home does not remain there for long. Bodies that have already walked far now turn outward again, carrying tools, baskets, and expectations into a day that will ask for strength before it offers anything in return. Labor in Angkor does not begin with choice, it begins with timing. The season decides first, and the body follows. Rice fields lie beyond the houses, spread across land shaped by water and embankments. Reaching them requires walking under a sun that rises quickly and presses down without patience. Work starts early not because people prefer it, but because delay carries consequences. Missed hours mean weaker harvests. Weaker harvests mean hunger later, when the season no longer allows correction. Rice is more than food here. It is measure, it is obligation, it is quiet pressure. Its cycles dictate movement across the landscape, pulling people outward at dawn and drawing them back only when strength is spent. Planting, tending, harvesting. Each stage demands repetition, and repetition wears the body in ways that are not dramatic, but cumulative. Bending becomes habit. Carrying weight becomes normal. Fatigue settles into muscles as something expected, rather than avoided. Tools are simple, but their simplicity does not make the work gentle. Wooden handles, iron edges, woven baskets. Each object must be lifted, dragged, or balanced. There is no separation between the person and the tool. The body becomes part of the mechanism that feeds the city. When tools break, they are repaired quickly. When bodies fail, the work still waits. Children appear here too, not as observers, as participants. They carry smaller loads, learn movements by copying older hands, absorb rhythm without explanation. Labor is not taught formally, it is inherited through repetition. By the time strength fully arrives, the path is already set. The landscape offers no shelter from this routine. Fields are open. Shade is rare. Water glimmers nearby, promising relief, while reminding everyone that the same element that sustains life can undermine it. Too much rain floods fields, too little cracks them. The balance is delicate, and when it fails, anxiety spreads quietly, carried home in tired bodies and shorter meals. There is a darkness woven into this morning work, though it rarely announces itself. Hunger is not always present, but the memory of it is. People remember seasons when water came late, or not at all, when rice grew thin, when labor increased instead of easing. The body learns these memories. It responds with urgency, even when conditions seem stable. Work does not end at the fields. Food must be transported, stored, processed. Each step adds weight to the day. Rice is heavy before it becomes sustenance. Fish must be cleaned, vegetables gathered. Nothing arrives ready. Everything requires effort layered upon effort. And yet this labor creates something more than exhaustion. It creates predictability. The same motions repeated across generations hold the city together. Angkor does not rely on sudden brilliance. It relies on millions of ordinary actions, performed without interruption. This stability is comforting, and it is binding. When your body is required every day, freedom becomes an abstract idea rather than a lived one. As the sun climbs higher, heat intensifies. Movement slows, not because work is finished, but because bodies must ration strength. Breaks are brief. Water is precious. The morning's calm gives way to a steady, pressing awareness of time. Tasks must be completed before heat turns effort into danger. This is where the true cost of Angkor's scale becomes visible. The city's vastness depends on countless bodies repeating the same motions across wide distances. Each person contributes a small part, rarely seeing the whole. Temples rise, reservoirs fill, markets operate, all because this morning labor never fully stops. And as the body reaches the edge of what it can give before rest becomes necessary, another rhythm begins to pull people inward again. From fields and workspaces, paths lead back towards places of exchange, where effort is briefly transformed into food, goods, and human contact. Because once the body has given what it can to the land, life in Angkor turns toward another pressure, the market, where survival is negotiated quietly, one exchange at a time. That is where the next movement waits. But when bodies turn back from fields and workspaces, Angkor does not become quieter. It becomes denser. Paths that carried people outward in the morning now pull them inward, toward open spaces where goods, voices, smells, and small decisions begin to overlap. This is the market, not a single building, not a fixed structure, but a living pause in the day, where effort briefly transforms into exchange. Markets in Angkor are informal by design. There are no permanent stalls of stone or wood, no locked doors waiting to open. Instead, woven mats are laid out on packed earth. Baskets are set down. Goods are arranged carefully but without ceremony. What is sold here reflects what the land and water have allowed that season. Rice measured in modest portions, fish dried or fresh depending on proximity to canals, vegetables gathered nearby, palm products, simple tools, cloth, household items that rarely last long. The market is loud, but not chaotic. Voices rise and fall in patterns learned over years. Bargaining is not aggressive, it is expected. Prices shift with supply, with rumor, with memory of harder seasons. Everyone here understands that abundance is temporary. No one fully relaxes into plenty. Smell defines the space as much as sound. Cooked rice mixes with fish. Smoke from small fires drifts between mats. Damp earth releases heat, and the scent of water never fully disappears. This sensory weight is constant, grounding people in the present moment, whether they wish to be or not. There is light here too. Markets are social spaces. People meet eyes, exchange news, watch each other closely. Children linger near adults, absorbing the rhythms. Fortune tellers appear among traders, as shown on the Bayon reliefs, sitting close to everyday commerce, reminding everyone that uncertainty is not separate from survival. Gambling and cockfighting scenes carved in stone echo the same truth. Stress seeks release wherever it can. But beneath this surface movement lies a quieter tension. Markets expose inequality without naming it. Some people arrive with surplus, others arrive with very little. Coins are counted carefully. A bad bargain matters. A missed sale can mean a thinner evening meal. Hunger does not shout here. It waits. For the urban poor, the market is both opportunity and risk. Prices can rise suddenly after floods or droughts. Grain shortages appear first in cities, where demand concentrates. Those with connections to temples or officials fare better. Those without adapt silently, skipping meals, selling possessions, entering dependency. Women play a visible role here too, especially in small trade and food preparation, as described by Zhou Dagan and depicted in relief scenes. Their labor bridges household and public space, carrying domestic survival into open view. This visibility does not equal power. It reflects necessity. Markets also serve as observation points for authority. While not heavily guarded, they are watched. Social behavior unfolds in public. Reputation matters. Debt is remembered. Favor travels slowly. Punishment travels fast. Order is maintained less by force than by awareness of being seen. The market's calm is deceptive. It feels communal, even warm. Yet it rests on fragile foundations. A single failed harvest, a disrupted water system, political pressure elsewhere in the empire. All ripple here first. What looks like normal life is actually balance, held together by constant effort. As afternoon heat deepens, movement slows again. Goods thin out, voices soften. Those who sold enough prepare to leave. Those who did not must adjust quietly. The market does not offer closure. It only reflects the state of the day. What remains constant is repetition. Tomorrow, mats will return. Goods will be rearranged. The same negotiations will resume with small variations. This continuity is comforting, but it also traps people inside patterns they cannot escape. Markets do not promise change, they promise continuation. And as the sun begins its gradual descent, the market releases people back into narrower spaces, toward workshops, courtyards, and rooms where hands return to skilled repetition rather than exchange. Because once trade is finished, another truth of Angkor becomes unavoidable. Survival depends not only on selling and buying, but on how long the body itself can endure the cost of work. That cost waits in the crafts, the tools, and the strained muscles that shape the city's quiet backbone. After the market releases its grip on the day, Angkor does not rest. It tightens. Trade fades, but work does not. Behind foams, beside paths, near water, and close to temples, the real engine of the city continues to turn. Quiet, repetitive, and physically demanding. Craft in Angkor is not art for admiration. It is survival made visible. Every basket, every ceramic jar, every tool, rope, and woven cloth exists because someone's hands repeated the same motion thousands of times. Skill is learned early, usually within families, not through instruction, but observation. Children watch, then they help, then they carry the same work forward, without ever naming it as a choice. Workspaces are small and often poorly lit. Smoke from hearths mixes with dust. Heat builds quickly, especially in the dry season. Bodies adapt not by comfort but by endurance. Tools are simple and reused until they fail. Repair matters more than replacement. Bayan bas reliefs show these moments clearly. Porters bent under loads, artisans focused on detail, workers hauling supplies, not for glory, but because the day demands it. These scenes exist alongside kings and gods, not beneath them, reminding us that monumentality depends on ordinary strain. There is pride here in skill, but it is quiet pride. Mastery does not grant mobility. Knowing how to weave, carve, fire clay, or transport stone rarely changes social position. Craft defines identity, but it also fixes it. You become known for what your hands do, and you remain there. The body pays the price. Repetition wears joints. Heavy loads strain backs. Cuts and burns are common. Without modern medicine, small injuries can turn dangerous. Healing relies on rest, herbs, and ritual. But rest is a luxury. If the body stops, the household suffers. Labor in Angkor is not evenly distributed. Temple construction and maintenance require enormous, organized effort, drawing workers from across the landscape. Inscriptions record lists of people assigned to duties, rations measured carefully, time structured by obligation. Work here is not voluntary. It is scheduled, expected, and enforced through social and institutional pressure. This creates a quiet imbalance. Temples rise in stone. Workers return to wooden homes that disappear over time. What remains in ruins is not what most people lived in, but what their labor sustained. There is light within this system. Skill brings recognition within a narrow world. Communities depend on reliable hands. craft knowledge passes across generations, creating continuity even when political or environmental conditions shift. In this way, labor binds the city together. But the dark thread never leaves. When water systems strain, when harvests falter, when disease spreads, labor does not stop, it intensifies. Repair replaces creation. Maintenance replaces growth. The same bodies are asked to do more with less. Workers live close to their labor. Kilns, weaving areas, and tool repair sites cluster near homes. The boundary between work and rest is thin. Sound travels easily. The city hums when voices quiet. Social hierarchy remains visible here too. Skilled artisans serve institutions. Porters serve everyone and no one. Servants and unfree laborers carry burdens without recognition. Joe DeGuan notes social layers clearly, describing people whose lives are bound to service rather than self-direction. Despite this, moments of humanity surface. Small jokes pass between workers. A shared drink cools the body briefly. Laughter appears not because life is easy, but because tension demands release. These moments are fleeting but real. As daylight softens, labor slows but does not end. Tools are cleaned, materials stored. Bodies stretch unconsciously, learning their own limits without speaking them aloud. The city breathes through tired hands. Craft is not celebrated here. It is absorbed into routine. Its beauty lies not in the finished object, but in the fact that it exists at all, against heat, fatigue, and uncertainty. And as workers return toward their families, another structure becomes unavoidable, one that shapes not only labor, but every interaction, every expectation, every boundary that cannot be crossed. Because in Angkor, skill may define what you do, but status defines who you are allowed to be. That truth waits ahead, quietly embedded in daily life, in clothing, access, and silence. As the tools are set aside and the body is allowed a brief moment of stillness, another force becomes more noticeable, one that presses less on the muscles and more on every decision a person makes. In Angkor, hierarchy is never announced loudly. It does not need to be. It is understood long before words are spoken, felt in posture, in distance, in clothing, and in access. Daily life unfolds inside a layered world. At the top stand elites connected to court and temple institutions, surrounded by servants, attendants, and dependents. Below them are skilled workers, traders, farmers, and fishers, whose labor sustains the city's rhythm day after day. Beneath all visible order exist people whose freedom is limited: servants, bonded laborers, and slaves, described by Joe DeGuan in the late 13th century, whose lives are tied not to choice, but to obligation. This structure is not abstract. It shapes movement. Who may approach a temple closely? Who may speak first in a market exchange? Who may travel freely along roads? And who must remain where they are assigned? Even clothing becomes a marker. Simple garments signal position immediately. Status is readable at a glance. Hierarchy brings a form of stability. Everyone knows their role. Expectations are clear. Conflict is reduced not by equality, but by predictability. In a world dependent on massive coordination, water systems, temples, roads, food supply, order matters. This is the light side of structure. But the same clarity removes flexibility. Social mobility is rare. Birth determines trajectory. Skill does not override position. A talented worker remains a worker. A servant remains attached to service. The idea of choosing a different path barely exists as a concept. Temple inscriptions reveal how deeply this structure reaches. People are listed by duty. Rice rations are measured. Time is counted in obligations rather than hours. Life becomes something administered, not explored. Bayon bas-reliefs reinforce this reality visually. Elites appear composed and elevated. Commoners bend, carry, serve, and cluster in dense scenes of activity. The contrast is deliberate. Power is meant to be seen, not questioned. Fear plays a quiet role here, not constant terror, but awareness. Punishment exists. Zhou Dagan records severe penalties for transgression, including physical marking. Even when rarely applied, the possibility is enough. Social control works best when it does not need to announce itself. For many, daily life includes watching others being corrected, not always violently, but visibly. Shame is a tool. Reputation matters. A household's standing depends on compliance as much as productivity. This does not mean people live without emotion. Families care deeply for one another. Communities form bonds. Humor appears in unexpected places. Gambling and cockfighting scenes on the Bayon reliefs suggest that stress finds outlets. Where there is hierarchy, there is also quiet resistance in the form of play, distraction, and shared laughter. Yet, even leisure reflects structure. Who may gamble freely? Who risks punishment for the same act? Who absorbs loss quietly because there is no cushion beneath them? Hierarchy also shapes vulnerability. When food shortages occur, elites draw from reserves. When illness spreads, those with fewer resources suffer first. Hospitals built under Jayavarman VII represent an extraordinary attempt to address suffering, but they do not erase inequality. Care exists, yet access remains uneven. At night, hierarchy does not disappear. Guarded spaces remind people where they belong. Movement feels watched. Darkness does not equal freedom, it sharpens boundaries. Despite this, the system persists for centuries, not because it is gentle, but because it works well enough to sustain itself. Order outweighs discomfort. Continuity outweighs individual desire. For the ordinary person, hierarchy becomes background noise, always present, rarely discussed. It is not debated, it is endured. And endurance becomes a skill as important as craft. But beneath this structure, another layer moves quietly, offering meaning, reassurance, and sometimes fear. A layer that does not belong to the state alone, but enters homes, workspaces, and the smallest daily actions. Because beyond hierarchy, beyond labor, beyond control, belief waits, shaping how people explain suffering, hope for balance, and face uncertainty. That is where the city's inner life turns next. As evening approaches, the presence of temples becomes impossible to ignore, not because of ceremony alone, but because they sit at the center of how Angkor actually functions. These are not distant spiritual islands. They are offices, storehouses, kitchens, dormitories, and work hubs woven directly into daily routine. To step near a temple is not only to step closer to the gods, it is to step into administration. Temples receive food. Temples store rice. Temples coordinate labor. Inscriptions list people assigned to them: cleaners, cooks, guards, ritual specialists, attendants, all moving through their days according to schedules that mix devotion with logistics. Prayer and paperwork share the same walls, even if no one would describe it that way aloud. This is where belief becomes practical. Offerings are small and frequent: rice, fruit, incense. Not grand sacrifices every day, but steady gestures that mark time and responsibility. Missing an offering feels less like a theological error and more like forgetting to lock a door. Uncomfortable, unsettling, something that lingers in the mind. Bayon bas-reliefs show this blending clearly. Everyday scenes unfold beside sacred imagery. a market argument carved not far from a divine figure, a fortune teller seated near trade activity. The message is subtle but firm. Religion is not separate from life, it runs alongside it, quietly supervising. There is comfort here. Ritual gives shape to uncertainty. When water levels shift or harvests worry households, temples offer explanation and reassurance. Balance can be restored. Merit can be earned. Disorder can be addressed, even if only symbolically. But temples also demand. Temple communities require constant support. Food does not appear by miracle. Someone grows it, someone carries it, someone records it. When inscriptions list rations and names, they reveal a system that depends on precision. Devotion becomes measurable. This creates pressure. Ritual mistakes matter. Forgetting a step feels dangerous, not because lightning will strike immediately, but because imbalance invites fear. People worry quietly. They double-check gestures. They repeat phrases carefully. Here, a soft human moment appears. Priests are respected, but they are also human. Beyond scenes suggest a world where ritual specialists coexist with gamblers and traders. One can imagine a monk correcting a chant with absolute seriousness, while nearby someone worries less about cosmic order and more about whether their fish will sell before sunset. There is room for gentle irony in this contrast. Life insists on continuing even while meaning is negotiated. Temples also act as gathering points. News travels here, instructions arrive here. During festivals, crowds swell, turning sacred space into social space. For a brief moment, hierarchy loosens slightly. People stand closer together. Shared attention replaces separation. Yet hierarchy never disappears. Access is still controlled. Roles remain fixed. Temples reflect a same structure as the city, only with added weight. Some temples serve additional functions. Under Jayavarman VII, hospital temples appear across the empire, places where care, ritual, and administration merge. Healing is offered through herbs, rest, prayer, and belief combined. The existence of these institutions suggests widespread illness and injury. You do not build hospitals unless suffering is common. This is both hopeful and sobering. Care exists, but so does need. At night, temples do not sleep fully. Lamps remain lit, incense lingers, guards move quietly. The presence of authority feels softer here, but it does not vanish. For ordinary people, temples are unavoidable anchors. You pass them on the way to work. You depend on them for calendars, festivals, and reassurance. You fear displeasing what they represent. Religion in Angkor is not philosophical debate. It is routine maintenance of order, internal and external. And sometimes, amid the seriousness, a small moment of relief slips in. A familiar chant remembered correctly, an offering accepted without correction. A quiet sense of, today, at least, things are balanced. These moments matter more than doctrine. As darkness deepens, belief does not fade, it sharpens. Spirits feel closer, mistakes feel heavier, lamps feel smaller. And as people turn back toward their homes, belief follows them, not loudly but persistently, shaping how they interpret illness, luck, fear, and hope. Yet belief is not the only force watching. Beyond ritual comfort, beyond sacred routine, rules remain, written and unwritten, ensuring that order is not only believed in, but enforced. That tension waits ahead, in the spaces where law, authority, and silent observation shape behavior, even when no one is speaking. As belief settles quietly into the evening, another presence remains just as constant, though far less comforting. It does not chant. It does not offer incense. It does not promise balance. it simply watches. In Angkor, order is not maintained by faith alone. It is reinforced by rules, visible and invisible, that guide behavior even when no authority figure stands nearby. Law here is not experienced as a book or a courtroom. It is felt as atmosphere, as awareness, as caution woven into daily habit. City gates, causeways, and guarded entrances shape how people move. Some paths feel open, others feel restricted without explanation. You learn quickly where you belong and where you do not. Surveillance does not need to be constant to be effective. It only needs to be possible. Accounts like Xiao Deguan's descriptions remind us that punishment exists, sometimes harsh and, more importantly, memorable. Stories travel faster than enforcement. A single visible correction can discipline an entire neighborhood. People adjust quietly. They lower voices. They avoid attention. This creates a city that appears calm on the surface. Markets function, temples operate, homes remain orderly. But beneath this calm lies awareness that behavior is observed not only by officials, but by neighbors, elders, and institutions tied to the state. Collective responsibility matters. One person's mistake can reflect on an entire household. Reputation becomes a form of currency. Protecting it shapes choices more effectively than threat alone. At night, this awareness deepens. Guarded gates signal transition. The city does not close completely, but it tightens. Movement feels heavier. Sounds carry farther. Light becomes precious. Lanterns glow softly. Shadows stretch. A quiet patrol passes. The knowledge that someone might be watching does not create panic. It creates discipline. People stay where they are expected to be. This system provides stability. Theft is reduced. Disorder is contained. Large populations coexist without constant conflict. In a city dependent on coordination, this matters. But stability has a cost. Silence becomes safety. Curiosity fades. Expression narrows. People learn when not to speak. Surveillance does not need many guards when people guard themselves. Even children absorb this. They learn which questions bring attention and which do not, which games are acceptable, which paths are safe, which times of day feel freer. This does not mean Angkor is joyless. Laughter exists, play exists, but it happens within understood boundaries. The city teaches restraint early. There is quiet irony here. A civilization capable of vast engineering and spiritual ambition relies on simple human caution to maintain order. Fear is not constant, but it is never absent. Law is reinforced not only through punishment, but through visibility. Architecture itself participates. Walls channel movement. Towers watch. Roads guide flow. The built environment becomes a silent enforcer. At times, this pressure softens. Festivals allow noise. Ritual gatherings loosen posture. For a moment, people stand closer, speak louder, feel less separate. These moments feel precious precisely because they are temporary. As night deepens, the city becomes watchful rather than asleep. Fire risk increases. Wooden homes sit close together. A single spark can destroy years of labor. People remain alert. Buckets stand ready. Anxiety stays low, but constant. The darkness carries sound differently. A cough, a step, a distant shout, everything feels closer. And yet, life continues. People adjust. They always have. Order is not experienced as oppression every moment. It becomes background, like humidity, like heat. You notice it most when it shifts. For the ordinary person, survival depends not on challenging rules, but on navigating them smoothly, staying unnoticed, staying compliant, staying useful. This is how Angkor sustains itself, not through constant force, but through shared understanding of limits. And within those limits, families still form bonds. Work continues. Belief offers meaning. The city breathes on. But when rules grow heavy, people turn inward, toward family, duty, and emotional restraint, learning to manage not only behavior, but feeling. That quiet internal world waits next, because beyond law and observation, life inside Angkor is also shaped by what people are expected not to express. Belief in Angkor does not begin at the temple gate. It begins at home, at the edge of a wooden platform, beside a water jar, in the quiet calculations people make before they act. Religion here is not abstract philosophy. It is practical, protective, necessary. In a city shaped by monsoon cycles, illness, labor pressure, and hierarchy, belief becomes a way to reduce uncertainty when control is limited. Temples dominate the skyline, but belief saturates the ground level of daily life. It shapes routines long before formal rituals begin. Ordinary people do not spend their days debating doctrine. They focus on simpler questions. Are the spirits calm? Are the ancestors respected? Are the unseen forces that govern luck and health being properly acknowledged? Belief does not remove danger, but it offers explanation when danger appears, and that alone carries value. Households maintain small shrines, offerings of food, flowers, incense, water, not placed out of extravagance, but out of habit. These acts are woven into the rhythm of the day. They happen alongside cooking, cleaning, and preparation for work. Skipping them feels risky, like leaving a door unlocked. Temples function as anchors, but they are also institutions. They are surrounded by storage areas, staff quarters, kitchens, and workspaces. They require supplies, labor, organization. Monks and attendants move through these spaces not only as spiritual figures, but as administrators of time, ritual, and resources. Ordinary people interact with temples as part of their economic reality. They deliver goods, perform assigned labor, attend scheduled observances tied to calendars they did not design. This creates a subtle pressure. Ritual is comforting, but it is also obligatory. Missing an offering brings anxiety. Missing a required appearance can bring consequences. Faith and fear coexist without contradiction. The visual language of belief is everywhere. Reliefs carved into temple walls show gods and kings, but also markets, sickness, cooking, arguments, and daily interactions. This matters because it shows what people considered worthy of depiction. Religion does not erase ordinary struggle. It frames it. When someone falls ill, belief provides context. Hospitals established under Jayavarman VII, the Arogyasala, combine medicine and ritual. Healing is never purely physical. Treatment involves herbs, care, prayer, and offerings. These hospitals are widespread. Illness is common, not exceptional. Their existence implies suffering at scale. They also imply limits. Not everyone can reach them. Most care still happens at home, handled by family members without specialized knowledge. Belief fills the gap where certainty ends. Disease, injury, and exhaustion remain part of daily life. Religion does not promise prevention, only meaning. This is a critical distinction. Belief in Angkor is not optimistic in the modern sense. It does not guarantee improvement. It emphasizes balance, order, continuation. Merit is accumulated slowly. Consequences unfold over time. A good life is not defined by comfort, but by alignment with duty and ritual. This creates emotional discipline. People learn to accept misfortune without open rebellion. Anger directed at fate feels pointless. Instead, correction is sought inward. More offerings, stricter observance, careful adjustment. The dark side of this system is quiet resignation. When suffering is explained as imbalance, responsibility shifts inward. People ask what they failed to do, not what system failed them. This stabilizes society, but it also traps individuals inside explanations they cannot challenge. Belief reinforces hierarchy. Kings rule as divine intermediaries. Temples legitimize authority. Obedience is framed as cosmic order. For ordinary people, questioning power risks spiritual and social consequences. This does not mean belief is fake or imposed. It means it functions efficiently. It reduces friction. It allows millions to live inside a rigid system without constant collapse. At night, belief becomes more personal. Lamps flicker. Incense burns low. People speak softly to ancestors. They ask for protection, forgiveness, or simply endurance. These are moments intimate, quiet, sincere, not grand ceremonies, survival habits. In a city where tomorrow depends on water levels, harvest timing, and bodily strength, belief steadies the mind before sleep. Yet belief cannot hold everything together forever. When systems strain, when water fails, when labor demands exceed capacity, ritual alone cannot repair physical damage. Cracks appear slowly. People continue to believe, but belief begins to work harder. It compensates for instability instead of reinforcing balance. Tension accumulates beneath calm surfaces because faith can explain suffering, but it cannot stop it. And when environmental stress increases, belief is forced to carry weight it was never designed to bear. That strain is coming, not as sudden collapse, but as small disruptions that feel manageable at first. And those disruptions begin with the very element belief tries hardest to control: water. Water in Angkor is not background scenery. It is the central condition of life, the invisible system that determines whether the city feels stable or fragile, calm or tense. Every routine depends on it: cooking, washing, agriculture, transport. And because of this dependence, water is also the first place where trouble quietly begins. The canals, ponds, tanks, and vast barrays are designed to manage the monsoon, to store excess rain and release it when needed. But these systems require constant attention, maintenance, and cooperation across the entire landscape. When they work, life feels ordered. When they strain, the consequences ripple outwards slowly, almost politely, before anyone dares to name them as danger. At first, the changes are subtle. Water levels sit a little lower than expected at the end of the dry season. A household pond takes longer to refill. A canal moves more sluggishly, clogged with silt or vegetation. None of this looks dramatic. People adjust without complaint. They carry water farther. They ration use. They wake earlier to work around heat and scarcity. This adaptability is one strength of Angkor, but it is also what hides the seriousness of the problem. Because the city is built to endure variation, it absorbs stress quietly, pushing the burden downward onto ordinary routines, rather than upward into visible crisis. The water system itself is massive and complex. Modern research shows it was modified repeatedly over centuries, responding to changing environmental conditions. This means Angkor is not static. It is constantly being repaired, rebalanced, and adjusted. Maintenance labor becomes a permanent feature of life, clearing canals, reinforcing embankments, repairing gates, redirecting flows. These tasks are never finished. They demand bodies, they demand time, they demand coordination. When labor is plentiful and food secure, this system feels manageable. When pressure increases, the same tasks become exhausting obligations, layered on top of already demanding lives. The darker side of water management is that failure rarely announces itself clearly. A damaged embankment might hold for months before collapsing under sudden rain. A reservoir may appear full, but distribute water unevenly, favoring some fields over others. These imbalances create quiet inequality. Some households struggle earlier than others. Resentment can grow without open conflict. People notice who has easier access, whose fields stay greener longer, whose obligations seem lighter. Water, which once unified the city, begins to divide it. Disease follows water as closely as food does. Standing pools increase insects. Flooded paths contaminate drinking sources. Illness becomes more common during periods of instability, even if people lack the language to connect cause and effect. The existence of hospitals suggests that sickness is expected, not rare. Care is necessary at scale. But hospitals cannot erase fear. They only confirm it. When bodies weaken, labor suffers. When labor suffers, maintenance slows. This feedback loop tightens gradually, pulling the system inward. Markets reflect these changes before temples do. Prices fluctuate, bargaining becomes sharper. Goods arrive later or in smaller quantities. Fish catches vary with water levels. Rice supply feels less predictable. None of this means famine immediately, but it changes behavior. People become cautious. Hoarding increases. Small tensions surface in public spaces. The calm of everyday life remains, but it is thinner, stretched over uncertainty. Religious response intensifies during these periods. More offerings appear. Ritual observance becomes stricter. People seek protection and explanation at the same time. Belief works overtime, smoothing fear into routine. But even belief has limits. When disruptions repeat, anxiety no longer resolves after a single ritual cycle. It lingers. Authority attempts to respond through organization. Labor is redirected. Maintenance campaigns expand. Administrative control tightens. These actions are logical, but they also increase pressure on ordinary people, whose days are already full. The city's design, spread across a wide landscape, means solutions require movement. Travel distances grow tiring. Time costs increase. The effort needed just to maintain normality becomes heavier than before. Water, once a source of confidence, becomes something watched closely, discussed quietly, measured against memory rather than expectation. Elders compare seasons. Farmers recount patterns. Stories of past droughts or floods circulate, not as panic, but as cautionary reminders. These stories function like early warning systems, shaping decisions long before collapse occurs. The irony is this: Angkor's brilliance makes it vulnerable. A city capable of supporting vast populations through water control also risks systemic failure when that control weakens. There is no single moment when people say, "This is the end." Instead, there is a long period where life continues with added weight, more effort for the same results, less margin for error, fewer good days to offset the bad ones. This slow tightening is what makes Angkor's story so quiet and so human. It is not a tale of sudden disaster, but of endurance stretched thin. And within this stretching, daily life does not stop. Children are still raised, markets still open, temples still receive offerings. But beneath the surface, something has shifted. Water is no longer simply managed, It is negotiated, and negotiation, unlike control, always carries risk. The strain on Angkor does not arrive as a single moment that everyone recognizes at once. It appears as a change in how effort feels. The same work takes longer. The same harvest brings less confidence. The same water routes require more repair than memory says they once did. Life continues, but with friction. This friction is not dramatic enough to be called disaster, yet persistent enough to reshape behavior. People begin to plan more carefully, to conserve more quietly, to trust less openly. The city remains impressive, but its internal rhythm grows uneven. Like a body compensating for fatigue it does not admit. Infrastructure, once a symbol of mastery, becomes a source of anxiety. Canals must be cleared more often. Embankments need reinforcement after storms that feel heavier than before. Roads soften in wet seasons and crack in dry ones. Each repair pulls labor away from fields and households, creating trade-offs that cannot be solved cleanly. Someone must always give up time, strength, or food so the system can keep functioning. This redistribution of burden does not fall evenly. Ordinary people feel it first because they have the least buffer. Temple institutions still receive supplies, elite compounds remain maintained, but the margins shrink. A missed repair matters more. A delayed harvest hurts deeper. When things go wrong, recovery takes longer than memory suggests it should. Social tension grows subtly. Markets still operate, but bargaining sharpens. Voices lower. Disputes become more common, as shown even in temple reliefs that depict arguments and fights among ordinary people. These scenes are not accidents. They reflect lived reality. When resources feel tight, patience thins. Leisure activities like gambling and cockfighting, visible in the same reliefs, take on a different tone. They offer distraction, but also risk. Loss carries more weight when margins are narrow. Debt becomes harder to escape. Dependency deepens. The hierarchy of Angkor becomes more visible under strain. Those bound to service cannot simply leave when conditions worsen. Labor obligations remain, even when food security weakens. Inscriptions that list rations remind us that provisioning is controlled, measured, and conditional. This creates a quiet fear of shortage, not starvation in an instant, but the anxiety of counting bowls, tracking days, and hoping supplies last until the next cycle. Environmental stress amplifies all of this. Scientific studies of sediment and water systems suggest periods of drought followed by intense rainfall, a combination that damages infrastructure more than either extreme alone. Drought lowers reservoirs, it weakens embankments. Sudden rains then arrive with force, breaching systems already compromised. For people living inside this environment, the experience is not abstract data. It is watching water behave differently than expected. Paths flood faster, fields drain unevenly, familiar signs lose reliability. Memory becomes less useful as a guide, and that loss is deeply unsettling. Belief responds as it always has. Ritual activity increases, offerings multiply. People seek to restore balance through spiritual means when material systems resist easy repair. This does not mean belief is naive. It means belief is adaptive. It offers psychological stability when practical control slips. But belief cannot rebuild embankments alone. It cannot redirect storms. Over time, the gap between ritual effort and physical outcome becomes noticeable, even if unspoken. Authority reacts by intensifying organization. More labor is mobilized. Maintenance schedules expand. Control tightens. These responses are logical, but they also increase strain on already tired bodies. Travel for service becomes longer and more frequent. Rest becomes shorter. Illness spreads more easily among exhausted populations, especially in water-rich environments where insects thrive and sanitation is fragile. Hospitals exist, but they cannot meet every need. Care is limited. Recovery is uncertain. A sick day becomes a serious setback. The city still functions, but it does so through endurance rather than ease. This distinction matters. Endurance implies cost. It means life is being sustained by effort rather than balance. The calm surface that defines Angkor's image hides this cost well. Stone monuments remain unmoved by stress. They continue to project order, permanence, and authority. Meanwhile, the wooden world beneath them absorbs shock after shock. Homes burn, paths wash away, tools wear out faster. None of this leaves dramatic ruins for future observers. It simply erodes daily resilience. What makes this phase particularly human is that people do not abandon Angkor immediately. They adapt, they adjust, they tell stories about past hardships. They hope cycles will correct themselves. This hope is not foolish. It has worked before. But systems can cross thresholds quietly, where previous solutions no longer restore equilibrium. When that happens, continuation becomes harder to justify, even if no single event forces a decision. The city enters a long period of ambiguity. It is still home, it still provides structure, but it no longer feels generous. It demands more than it gives. This is the emotional turning point, not a political one. The moment when people begin to imagine alternatives, movement, or withdrawal, even if only in thought. And that imagining transforms Angkor from an unquestioned center into one option among others. Angkor does not end the way stories usually expect cities to end. There's no single night of fire, no final evacuation, no moment when gates close forever and silence falls at once. Instead, the city thins, it loosens, it exhales people gradually, unevenly, without announcement. Life continues inside its boundaries, even as its density changes. And this is what makes Angkor difficult to understand from ruins alone. Stone remains where people do not. Wood vanishes first. Paths soften. Neighborhoods lose their edges. The city looks intact from a distance while becoming lighter from within. For ordinary people, departure is rarely dramatic. It begins with choice under pressure. A family moves closer to fields because travel has become too costly. Another leaves a neighborhood that floods too often. Labor assignments shift outward. Service obligations stretch farther from the center. Each adjustment feels temporary, rational, reversible. No one believes they are witnessing the end. They believe they are optimizing survival. The low-density structure of Angkor makes this possible. Because the city is spread across a vast landscape of ponds, fields, canals, and temples, leaving one zone does not mean leaving the system entirely. People resettle along edges, closer to resources that feel more reliable. They remain connected by memory, ritual, and occasional travel. This gradual redistribution preserves continuity while eroding concentration. Markets shrink before they vanish, fewer traders arrive. Goods still circulate, but variety narrows. Prices become less predictable. The social energy of public spaces dulls. These changes are subtle enough to be missed by outsiders, but unmistakable to those who remember how full the spaces once felt. Temple life adapts as well. Some institutions maintain activity longer, supported by remaining labor and stored resources. Others consolidate. Ritual calendars continue, but attendance thins. Offerings are smaller. Maintenance becomes selective. Not every structure can be cared for equally anymore, and choices must be made. This selection process introduces a quiet hierarchy of preservation, favoring monuments with political, religious, or logistical importance, while peripheral spaces fade faster. Authority weakens without collapsing. Control persists, but reach shortens. Officials can still mobilize labor, but from fewer households. Travel networks remain, yet their use changes. Roads see fewer carts. Rest houses host fewer travelers. The empire's infrastructure does not fail outright, it becomes underused. Underuse is dangerous in a different way than overload. Without constant movement and repair, systems degrade. Vegetation returns. Water channels clog. Structures that once required daily attention now sit unattended for long periods, accelerating decay. Environmental pressure continues during this thinning. Droughts and floods still arrive. Without dense populations to maintain embankments and canals, damage lingers longer. Each unrepaired breach compounds future problems. What once would have been a minor inconvenience becomes a lasting obstacle. People respond by routing around damage rather than fixing it, further redirecting movement away from the core. This rerouting reshapes daily geography. The city's center remains symbolically powerful, but practically less necessary. Memory plays a crucial role during this phase. People do not forget Angkor. They remember it as a place that worked, a place that fed them, a place that anchored belief and identity. This memory slows abandonment. Shrines remain active near major temples, even as residential zones empty. Pilgrimage-like visits continue. Ritual does not require permanent residence. In fact, distance can intensify reverence. The city becomes something people return to rather than live inside. This transformation is emotionally complex. Leaving does not feel like escape. It feels like retreat with respect. The dark side of this process is invisibility. Because departure is gradual and quiet, suffering leaves little trace. Hunger, illness, exhaustion, and fear accompany relocation. But these experiences do not fossilize. Archaeology captures stone and waterworks more easily than fatigue and decision-making. As a result, the story of Angkor risks becoming architectural rather than human. Yet the human dimension is where the truth lies. A city can remain physically impressive while becoming socially hollow. Jungle growth later amplifies this illusion. Trees reclaim paths. Roots split walls. What looks like sudden abandonment is actually the final stage of a long thinning. The jungle does not conquer a thriving metropolis overnight. It occupies space already made available by absence. This matters because it reframes the idea of collapse. Angkor does not fail because people suddenly abandon belief or technology. It changes because the balance between effort and reward shifts beyond what ordinary lives can sustain. When daily routines require more energy than they return, people adjust location rather than ideology. They move before they rebel. They disperse before they starve. This strategy preserves lives at the cost of density. The city survives as memory, ritual center, and symbolic core, even as it loses its role as a daily living machine. By the time Angkor looks lost to later observers, it has already lived through decades of quiet reconfiguration. What remains visible is not ruin, but residue. Stone temples stand because they were never meant to be lived in. Wooden neighborhoods vanish because they were. The disappearance of ordinary life is not failure, it is evidence of adaptation. But adaptation has limits. Eventually, the routines that once sustained Angkor no longer justify returning at all. The city becomes a place of visitation rather than habitation. And when that threshold is crossed, Angkor completes its transformation from living system to remembered landscape. Angkor was never designed to be remembered as a ruin, because for the people who lived inside its landscape, Memory was not a goal, and legacy was not a daily concern. What mattered was that water moved when it should, that rice grew when it was planted, that temples received offerings on time, and that families survived another season without falling into hunger, debt, or forced service. This was a city built not for spectacle, but for continuity. And continuity rarely announces itself loudly. It settles into habit. It repeats. It becomes invisible to those who depend on it most. The greatness of Angkor was not something ordinary people admired from a distance. It was something they walked through, worked inside, and adjusted to every day, often without choice and rarely with praise. Order shaped life more than ambition. The city did not ask its people what they wanted to become. It asked where they belonged. Labor followed obligation. Movement followed water. Belief followed routine. Even religion, visible everywhere in stone and ritual, was practical before it was abstract, focused on protection, balance, and survival, rather than personal revelation. Temples were places of meaning, but also places of storage, administration, schedules, and lists. Faith was woven into logistics. Devotion did not replace work, it framed it. In this world, freedom was not defined by options, but by stability. To know what tomorrow would look like was safer than imagining something better. The system worked because it respected limits. Angkor did not try to compress its people into walls. It spread them across a living landscape of ponds, canals, fields, and roads, allowing daily life to breathe outward rather than upward. This low density reduced pressure while increasing dependence on infrastructure. Everyone was connected, but no one was truly independent. When water flowed correctly, the city felt calm, predictable, even generous. When it failed, the fragility beneath the calm became visible immediately. The same canals that fed rice could flood homes. The same reservoirs that stored abundance could breed illness. The same roads that connected regions could drain labor away from households that needed it most. What makes Angkor unsettling is not how it fell, but how rational its decline was. There was no sudden betrayal of tradition, no mass rejection of belief, no dramatic moment when people chose chaos over order. Instead, families made careful decisions. They moved slightly farther from the center. They followed water that felt more reliable. They reduced obligations when possible. They adjusted. The city did not collapse, it thinned. And because it thinned gradually, it did not resist. A city designed around routine does not panic easily. It adapts quietly, even when adaptation leads away from itself. This is why Angkor feels different from cities defined by walls alone. Its ending is not loud enough to be heroic. Its survival is not simple enough to be tragic. It exists in between, in a long twilight where daily life continues just enough to delay finality. Long after political power weakened, people still came to the temples. Long after neighborhoods emptied, rituals continued. Long after the water system struggled, memory held the place together. Angkor became less a city and more a reference point, a center you orbited rather than inhabited. And in that form, it lasted longer than many cities that burned brightly and vanished quickly. There is a quiet darkness here, but it is not evil. It is the darkness of endurance, of bodies worn by repetition, of choices made under pressure that leave no dramatic trace, of labor that supports monuments without being named, of lives that matter deeply in the moment and disappear almost completely afterward. When we walk through Angkor today, we see faces carved in stone, but not the hands that fed them, not the backs that bent beneath baskets of rice, not the children who learned early that routine was safer than hope. The silence we feel is not emptiness, it is absence layered over former presence. And yet, there is something profoundly calming about this realization. Angkor does not demand admiration, it does not ask to be mourned, it simply remains, not as it was, but as it needs to be now. The city accepts that its purpose has changed. Where once it organized water and labor, it now organizes memory. Where once it managed daily survival, it now offers perspective. It reminds us that civilizations are not only built by vision, but by maintenance, and that most human lives pass not in moments of transformation, but in years of careful repetition. In that sense, Angkor was never truly lost. It only stopped asking people to live inside it. It released them gently, without ceremony, allowing the landscape to close around what remained. Stone stayed, wood returned to earth, water kept moving, and life, as it always does, continued elsewhere, carrying habits, skills, and beliefs shaped by this place into new routines beyond its reach. So when we speak of Angkor, we are not speaking about failure. We are speaking about a city that understood its limits, even if the people within it felt those limits as pressure. A city that valued order over freedom, not because it was cruel, but because order kept hunger away longer than chaos ever could. A city that worked until working required more than it could safely demand. And now, as the night settles again over stone corridors and quiet water, Angkor rests in the role it never planned for, but fulfills perfectly, not as a monument to greatness, but as a lesson in endurance, balance, and the quiet cost of keeping a world running long enough for ordinary lives to pass through it unnoticed. Good night.